Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We are on episode 60, if you can believe it, of our Saved USC webinar, and we kind of have a fun, relaxed one planned as our last one for the year. So thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about 25 predictions and our year in a review for 2024. Caveat, none of us really know what's going to happen. This is just all what we think and what we've seen. So don't take it too much to heart, but I did make sure to have some other people on here instead of just me. I'm going to go ahead and introduce both Amy Gregory and Wayne Stanley here in a minute. But beforehand, I just want to talk about a little bit about some admin and housekeeping. Per usual, we do record these sessions, and we will send a link out so that you can either listen to it later or share it amongst your peers. It'll always be available. We do encourage questions. If you would like to ask a question, there is a question feature somewhere on your screen. Everybody's setup is a little different, but we will try and monitor those and get through as many as we can. If you have a very specific question that we can't answer, then we will try and reach out to you offline, but please feel free to join the conversation. This is, like I said, a very chill, very relaxed episode today as everyone's getting ready for the holidays. And then we will send that follow-up email probably within a couple days. You'll get it from SoftPro or from Ellen Crema. One thing I did want to mention is we are opening the registration here for our SoftPro 2025 user group. And this year, if you haven't heard, it is at the Grand Hyatt Nashville in Nashville, Tennessee. It's going to be really fun. It's kind of a unique location for us. We're not at the beach this year. We're kind of trying to mix it up to make it easier for everybody to get to. So please let us know if you have any questions, or if you'd like to register, you can go to softprocorp.com/SPUG, which stands for SoftPro User Group, and register. And like I said, if you have any questions, then just go ahead and reach out to anybody at SoftPro, and we will be glad to help you out with that. So with that being said, I think we will go ahead and get started. And actually, I was going to introduce both Amy and Wayne, but I'm going to already start with a curveball. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and explain a little bit more what they do, because I only know their titles. And it might be a little bit more interesting conversation when we're giving you information if you know a little bit more about their background. So Amy, I'm going to start with you.
Right. Well, thank you so much for the invitation and for having me today. I'm Amy Gregory. I am the Chief Administrative Officer and President of the Florida Agency Network. We are a conglomerate of title brands throughout the state of Florida. And then we also have an ancillary company called Network Transaction Solutions that services not only the ancillary services in Florida, but also other states such as Ron and mobile post-closing and those type of services. I've worked my way up in the title industry, started in high school as a receptionist and kind of fell into the business, and have really grown to love the business and just fell in love with the closing experiences, and then really the processes and the efficiencies of processes, and just continued on my journey in management, leadership, support, and now, operating the company.
Awesome. Wayne?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Wayne Stanley. I'm the owner and president of Bowe Digital. We're a marketing firm for title agents, real estate attorneys, vendors, and other folks in the title space, but also real estate more broadly. We do everything from websites and social media content to logos and email marketing and video work. I got my start in the industry working for the American Land Title Association. I'm about to enter my 13th year in the industry now, which is crazy to think about. After working there for a few years, I started Bowe Digital to better help agents, especially with their marketing communications work. So I'm happy to talk about predictions and what may be in front of us today.
Well, good, because that's what we have on our agenda. Just for those of you that don't know, I'm Leslie Wyatt with SoftPro. I run our compliance department and spend most of my time traveling and speaking at events with these two lovely people. So with that, I think maybe we'll get started with just kind of the most basic. And we're finishing up 2024. I think that you guys can all remember that going into 2024, at the end of 2023, most predictions were pretty bleak. Everybody thought this was going to be kind of a doomsday year, and things weren't going to, there were going to be a pretty dramatic drop. And I think from my experience throughout the country, some areas were definitely impacted more than others, but I would say overall it was a lot more even of a year than anybody expected, thankfully. And we're going to talk about buyers and mortgage rates and stuff here in a little bit. But I don't know, Amy, you could talk a little bit like kind of what you were expecting in 24 versus what you saw.
I think we expected the same kind of, a little slowdown and just really uncertainty is what we went into 2024 with. And it definitely delivered uncertainty. I feel like, our main area is Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay really didn't get hit as hard as some of the other areas throughout the U.S. Until we had 2 hurricanes come through, and then boy, did we get hit. So I think, we kind of went through the middle of the year kind of doing okay and kind of staying pretty even. And then, the hurricane hit, and that has definitely impacted a lot of our servicing areas throughout Florida with 2 hurricanes. So I agree. I think it was not what we expected, but, we kind of had a hint of what was going to happen through 2024.
And Wayne, you kind of have a different perspective because you're kind of talking on a more broader with all the partners that you work with throughout the country, kind of like myself. And, Wayne and I speak together at a lot of conferences, or at least attend a lot of the same conferences. And we always try to make sure to be mindful that even though we've heard a lot of great things about the year and how it was better than expected, there's always those pockets or areas that really did get hard hit for one reason or for another. And Amy, the hurricane is a great thing. A great example, if you will. And I live in Chicago in the city, and we never had the same insanity that everybody had in 2020 to 2022. And I don't truly know why, because most big cities did, but we never had that. I mean, houses were selling at an insane rapid rate. But honestly, if you have a single family house in the area, the downtown area, and in 2020, you had a pocket listing, it never hit the market in 21, 22. Where now it hits the market and it sells in 2 days. So there was never that extreme. We never had a high or a low. I mean, things just sold quicker. And the prices obviously went higher, but we never had that crazy, top of the ceiling like they had out in LA or New York or anything. So Wayne, just curious, based on working throughout the country, kind of what was your take on what was, you guys thought you would see for your partners in 24 versus what you saw?
Like Amy, I think uncertainty was the name of the game. But I mean, I went to, I think I personally did 24 industry events this year from coast to coast. And I like doing that because we do have customers all over the country, but it also gives us a good feel for what's happening in general. It gives us better ideas to share back and forth with customers and everything. And it was shocking in some ways because we would go and some agents still had, one of their worst years in a long time. And other agents had record years this year. I mean, it completely depends on your market. And not just, we say your market all the time. I think it really depends on inventory in your market. It's not just your market and how savvy someone is. I think it depends on if you happen to be in an area that was lucky enough to see some of this initial increase in inventory, because we are seeing overall, I know Housing Wire and Altos Research just put out the inventory in general is up over the last 2 years, but we know that was bottom of the barrel. So up from nothing is still basically nothing. But if you're in one of those areas that saw an increase, it's kind of like what we keep seeing in headlines with the rates. When the rates decrease, the interest is there. When the inventory is there, the interest is there. And so we're seeing that, but that was definitely hard to figure out, especially on our end, just for marketing communication strategy. How do you figure this out when some folks are having their best year ever and other folks are still struggling to figure out what to do to make that needle move, when ultimately there's not a lot that we can do to force that when those are the market conditions. So that was hard and surprising, I think, just that there was such a big swing for so many folks. And I think kind of what Amy said with the hurricane too, you know more about what's happening in your own area. And so a lot of people didn't know that there were again major fires out west this year that affected a lot of property there. The hurricanes obviously affected the Carolinas this year. There were a harsher winter for the upper Midwest and Michigan than they expected in January and February. And so some of that slowed it down, but then when it did pick back up because of what happened with rates, it picked back up in months they didn't expect. So there was a lot of randomness there that we can't plan for. And I'm sure next year will be a little similar in that regard too.
I think. If we've learned anything in our industry is, like I started this whole thing, these are just guesses based on how long all of us have been in the industry and what we've seen. But, another thing that we saw here too was it wasn't so much seller driven like the past couple of years, obviously. It was more buyer driven and generally younger buyer driven, which I think we can expect to see a huge, uptick in younger buyers over the next year, because I also think 2024 lent itself to sellers coming to the realization that they're no longer going to get, 40% of our asking price in a bidding war, and buyers to the realization that they're not going to get a 3.1 interest rate. And I think part of 2024 took some time, especially maybe the first 6 months, it took some time for that reality to set in. So sellers that were kind of late in the game trying to get max out their, their return, and then buyers maybe late in the game felt like, I don't want to buy and I don't want to sell. At least in my area and a lot of the areas that I've traveled to, that seems to be the mindset now, that the sellers are more realistic. The buyers have accepted that, hey, guess what? A 6% interest rate is normal. A 2.9 is not. And so I think people are realizing that now. And to Wayne, what your point of like people in areas where like it was the worst year ever, and Amy, you may have seen this or felt this, I've noticed, and most of the people that I've spoke to about it, is areas or companies that a huge part of their business is refis really struggled in 2024, because who's refinancing a 3.1 mortgage interest rate to a 7.8, right? So that's another reason why we saw low inventories. People weren't so keen on selling because they got to turn around and buy a house for maybe less price, but the interest rate's higher. So I don't know, Amy, do you guys do a lot of refinances?
We do. So we have new construction, we have pre-sales, we have refis, we have commercial. We really try to stay diverse for that reason, because the refis were definitely a small percentage, where, 2022, that was a big percentage of the business was refis with the rates. Something new we saw this year too was, we call them now price improvements instead of price reductions. We didn't see those sign writers, or we didn't see those advertisements. They didn't stay on the market long enough to need a price reduction or a price improvement. And it was like the new thing again that you would see that. The other thing we saw kind of at the closing table over the past, I would say, year and a half or so, is the interest rate determined by someone's credit. You could tell someone's credit score based on their interest rate they got at the closing table that we were closing. When interest rates were between 2.5 and 4, it was too close. You couldn't tell. It was only maybe 0.25%, 3.25 as opposed to 3. It wasn't as obvious. Where this year, we've seen some in the 8s and 9s based on someone's credit score, and it just wasn't as obvious as it once was. So just, even at the table, things are changing because of the market that we're in and the interest rates that we're seeing.
Yeah, and to add on to that, somebody with a poor credit was able to come in at a 4.5, like, because the rate was so low. Like at 3, they're like, well, you can get a loan, but you're gonna have to pay up, a percent or two higher. It's like, okay, it's still so low. And I think that's, a reason why we also don't see that subset of people selling, because they're gonna have to turn around and get something like you at 8 or 9%. So, we're talking about interest rates and home buyers, and Wayne, maybe you can chime in. I know you do a lot with Housing Wire and whatnot, but I know one of their predictions, and I forget the number. I apologize to everyone. I literally had the flu for the past week and a half. I'm just now coming back to reality. I don't remember the numbers, but it is a huge number of expected young buyers. And I think that is because, one, that's just the nature of the business and the cycle. And two, I think because the interest rates have indeed come down some to a normal level, with more inventory coming on, and that inventory not being so inflated that even with the higher interest rates, people are able to afford what they should be affording, right? Those previous interest rates let people buy houses they could have never dreamed of, except they were overpaying for them in the first place. And now it's kind of met in the middle, at least what I've seen. And now we're expecting this surge of young buyers, or young millennial, or even older Gen Z type buyers, which I think is fantastic. And I'm curious, Wayne, as to what you've seen or heard, especially with your doings with your partners, but also Housing Wire, whatnot. Do you see them going to certain types? I know that in general, unusual or unlikely cities and areas in the country are becoming more and more popular, which is for sure helping those areas. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, and what have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, like everything else, it seems to be a little all over the place. I haven't gone through the list in depth yet, but I saw that both NAR and Realtor.com put out their hottest markets expectations for 2025 lists in the last week. And I think that I also saw an article from one of the industry publications recently about how the silver tsunami of folks, that are going to downsize, the boomers that are still, have these homes and they're moving. There was so much hope attached to that throughout the year in different ways. And there have been some more realistic, I think, reports lately of like, even if those folks do put those homes on the market, if it's the younger generations that are starting to buy, they won't be at a price level where they can afford those homes because those have appreciated the most in the last few years. So like it's this weird, it's still going to be top heavy in that regard of even if that inventory loosens up, you're not going to see people spending 400 plus in the Midwest on their first home. I also think that something that people will have to get used to. I do think that you are seeing that a lot of that new buyer interest is coming from younger generations. And Leslie knows that I love to give the industry grief all the time because we use the term the industry. I don't, I try not to, uses the term millennial very loosely just for anybody under 50 at this point, I think. But elder, I consider myself an elder millennial, and most of the millennial age group folks are in our mid to late 30s at this point. So they are well into their careers. They are not the couch surfer basement dwellers that the industry has talked about for the last decade. And we're really starting to see more of it's actually Gen Z that's starting to buy. These guys are the ones that are out of college. Some of them are on your teams already. And a lot of folks are like still worrying about how they're going to service millennials on their staff, but you've already got Gen Z and you may even have interns from Gen Alpha in there already, but that's a whole other topic for a different day. But I think that, that group has a lot of buying power as well because they've been savers this whole time. They didn't have the college debt that the millennial group did. They made different decisions. And so you may see what I'm seeing from a lot of these publications is that there may be more of a Gen Z purchase group that purchase ahead of some of the youngest millennials that are still out there because they made different decisions and they don't have the same level of debt and that kind of thing. And that will be interesting as they push into the market over the next couple of years too.
Yeah, and to add on to that, and you and I have talked about this in some presentations, the Gen Zers, and we and I could spend all day talking about the different generations here and our thoughts on the generalizations of them and how we don't like generalizing, but facts are facts. And a lot of Gen Zers, especially your older ones, a lot of them saw their parents go through the 2008 to 2012 crisis. A lot of them had homes that got foreclosed on, or parents houses getting, bankruptcy and losing jobs. And they have because of that, like Wayne said, they look at things a little different. They're not willing to dump all their money into one thing and go into debt. So I think you're dead on, Wayne, and those are not the people that are going to be reaching out buying this, $600,000 house when they're, for lack of a better word, and this is a complete generalization, which we say all the time, they're more logical. Right. I have one. She's not the elder one, but she's a Gen Zer, and it's wild. She's just the way they look at things and it's just because that's also just currently at that generation. But I think you're right. There's going to be that surge of first-time home buyers from younger people, and then you have your mid tier. But then like the people selling their lifelong houses to downsize. I think that's going to be the disconnect for a lot, because a lot of people who would then upgrade to those, I think. Like, why would you give up your 3% interest rate for that? And I think that's where they're going to struggle. Amy, you guys do closings day in, day out. Kind of age-wise, are you seeing younger buyers coming in the door, or are we just making all this up?
No, definitely. But I want to say something to that work-wise as well. They learned from their parents and their grandparents, and that's why they have side hustles. I do a lot of generational trainings that I'm trying to learn because we manage many different generations within our workplace. And that's why they have side hustles, because they saw the parents totally dedicated to one industry. They gave everything that they had. And then they got into their 50s maybe, and they were laid off and they had nothing to show for it. They were lost. they lost their home, whatever, maybe they got a divorce because it affected their marriage, whatever that looked like, they saw that, and they are so much wiser because they were exposed to that where we weren't exposed to that, with our parents and making some of those decisions. So I think understanding each generation is super, super important for their buying and also for their work ethics and what's important and why it's important. But yes, we are definitely seeing younger generations buying. We're also seeing them get creative on what they're buying. So tiny homes or a smaller home. We also see to the other extreme with multi-generationals buying. So you'll have grandparents, parents buying together. So they're living together, separate quarters within the same home so they can afford that. And they say it takes, a village to raise children, and it is so true. So, having that available. I personally live on a family compound. My husband and I have a family compound where my mom has a home in the back and my daughter and her daughter have a home in the front. And I love it. But it is definitely not, it's not the way though that I was raised. Like everyone had their own home in their own area and we were close, but 30 minutes away from each other, not 3 minutes away from each other. So definitely dynamics of what people are looking at and their priorities and what they're looking at are a little bit different.
And I think COVID in 2020 really drove a lot of that, right? Because everybody was forced to, whether you wanted to be with your family, you were with your family. And then when things really got locked down, people were like, okay, well, we can't have grandma and grandpa over here by themselves. Like everybody just come and live under one roof. And I think that's what's driven a lot of that. And I also, this is just my own 2 cents of what I've seen. And Wayne, you can chime in or anybody. I really think the whole mindset, because of the generation that's coming through now and the 2008, 2012 situation, I think there's a lot less of the whole keeping up with the Joneses. People are more mindful of their own personal situation. So between that and then just 2020 to 2022, I don't think people are as apt to try and, keep up with everybody. They're just kind of more involved and mindful of their own needs in life, which is wonderful. But I think the two of those combined has added to, Amy, to what you were just saying. So Wayne, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to add that this is, you see, Amy brought in the work side of it, which is true. And I've said in a lot of presentations this year, I sat in on this panel at Butler University on what, grads that have already accepted jobs, what their biggest perk that they're looking forward to is. And a lot of them was pet insurance. And you see that employers can roll their eyes and think all kinds of things about that. But then, last week, the International Council of Shopping Centers, ICSC, had one of their largest meetings in New York. And one of the big trends that was talked about for commercial real estate was what they're kind of dubbing right now as pet tail, which is pet retail, whether that's grooming or boarding or shopping or who knows what, doggy daycare, all of that kind of stuff. And so I think you're going to see more of that in all sides of the business, not just in terms of younger generations and that sort of thing. Just something funny that as we think about some of those changes, what you're talking about, Amy, with trying to learn about these different groups, it was funny to me that just this morning I read that about pet tail and what that trend is looking like even on the commercial side of business.
That's funny. Amy, you need to probably, get ready, because I had some notes and I pulled them up, and Florida is the #1 state people are migrating to. I mean, that's nothing new from a retirement or snowbird type thing, but a lot of younger people are now migrating to, I think I have some of it here. It's Florida, Texas, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Idaho, Tennessee, and Alabama. Cost of living is huge. I think that ties into what we were just talking about, right? They're not looking, they don't need to be metro. They don't need to be in the hottest, they want to be somewhere where they can live comfortably and enjoy life. Taxes are huge. I think that's one of the #1 draws to Florida for a lot of people. And just the way of life, the quality of life is one of the most people are saying, we want a larger piece of land where my whole family can live. And, because they can work remotely and they are able to go further than just these, suburbs right outside the city. So it's an interesting trend. It's clearly to the southern half of the country in the moment. Obviously, those trends can change. That's just what the predictions are and have been tracking from 24 to 25. And I'm sure, Amy, you see that a lot. Most of your buyers are from other states, especially some older folks are generally probably buying down there for their second home or retirement home for great reasons. So looks like you might be pretty busy next year with a lot of people coming to check out your state.
Yeah, and I mean, that really started in COVID for Florida. I feel like Florida was kind of exposed to be this glamorous vacation spot that's always been, but people really didn't recognize because they were busy running here, there, wanting to be close to the city, and COVID really changed those priorities for people and really realized I can make a drive in an hour or 2 hours to the beach. Like, okay, let's go live there. We don't just have to vacation there. We don't have a state tax, so that's definitely appealing. The negative is we don't have seasons, and that's probably one of the biggest things I hear when people move to Florida. I was born and raised in Florida, so I'm not leaving. I love the state. But I will tell you, the hurricane back to back, and as scary as they were, it came up the Tampa Bay. And we haven't had a hurricane come up the Tampa Bay in over 100 years. So, it was really impactful. And I think some of the people that moved here that had heard about hurricanes, you really don't know what a hurricane is until you live through it. I joked with Wayne at one point, like an earthquake, there's no preparation. So I'd much rather live through an earthquake than a hurricane because the anticipation and 3 weeks before we're hearing this hurricane may come. Then we're hearing where they think that it's going to come, and like just the anticipation, the anxiety that it creates. And then a lot of times it moves fast. So even just moving, 10 miles makes such a huge difference to the areas that are preparing for it. So I think that's been impactful. Hurricane season is done, so I think that's going to be easily forgotten, except for those that were truly hands-on impacted. We had some team members that had flooding in their homes, and they're still rebuilding their homes. You drive down the road and you still see stuff. So definitely, I think Florida is always been a hot market, but since COVID, our prices have really increased because of the demand, and because really, I think we finally were recognized for what's here. It is an amazing state, and besides the hurricanes, and they don't come often, that we don't have that negative, but you can be outside in the sun more than you will ever be inside. You'll never be stuck inside unless it's too hot. But really, we don't have the humidity like Texas does here, so it's really the best of all worlds. So we're ready. Move to Florida. We're ready.
I don't really know when you're talking of the sun. I don't really know what like the sun is from like November to May. So it sounds really nice. It's really great here in Chicago. Wade will attest to this. When people talk about being cold, we're like, no, there's like cold and then there's Midwest cold.
Yeah, we were in.
Do you have times that you're in your home and like you can't come out because of the sun? I mean, the snow, like you can't really do anything.
Well, not so much just snow, right? The temperature, like, if we get a polar vortex come through or whatnot, and I live in the city, like I said, like kind of right on the lake, so the wind coming off is. And so, I mean, it could be like minus 40. It's like you just can't. Our kids don't get snow days. We never get school canceled for snow because you walk to school. There's no school buses. What we get is cold days. They can't, like legally, they can't put a 5-year-old out. I think it's minus 28, which I don't know why that's the magic number. It makes me laugh that minus 26 is okay for a 5-year-old, but not minus 28.
Wow. Like negative seems like it shouldn't be. Like even negative one.
I agree.
Like, cool.
Well, maybe my kids are the ones that have to deal with it, not me.
Oh, wow.
We were talking about buyers and what we're seeing, and I think for the most part, we're seeing more of a younger generation coming through, and I think that's what's predicted. I'm curious your thoughts, Wayne. You brought up the NAR settlement, so of course we have to talk about it. And Wayne, you can correct me, and Amy, you can correct me. This is very regional, in my opinion, as far as the impact. And I've talked to some people, and it is already impacting them. We had somebody from Housing Wire on that was just like, oh, some markets are already like really feeling the pain from it. I've talked to other people who are like, it won't affect us at all. Wayne, I'm curious on your take with so many partners throughout the country on the NAR settlement, specifically on the buyer's agent agreement and having to sign that up front and who's going to pay what. So what do you see?
Yeah, this one was really wild for us this year because, like I said before, our primary base of customers is definitely title agents, but we do have a number of real estate agent customers as well. And we get to go to some of the larger events for those groups like Housing Wire, The Gathering, and we've gone to the Texas Association of Realtors, California, with tens of thousands of realtors. And I think it kind of just depends on what was custom in your market beforehand as to how much you're thinking about it. Because I know going to those events where even if you're not worried about it affecting your business, there's so much that has to be done in education and all of that they're trying to do. But on the title side, like I know you were in some of those meetings at Alta One, for example, Amy, and a lot of the title agents, it seemed almost like half the room was like, meh, no big deal. And the other half was like, we've got to do all the education. We have to help with this. A lot of them don't have any idea what's going on. I think that in general, I have to assume that after the first quarter, once some of this comes into play, there's still a lot of uncertainty there, but I think after some of that initial education is done, if you're not seeing it at that point, then you probably won't see it, make a big impact or difference in your market. But there are others that I think it's probably more worrisome in areas where you've got more what I would say like boutique agents that don't do this full time, or are only doing it for, and you might see this more in Amy's area of like, it's only when somebody wants a vacation home and so they dabble in business. They've got a license in Florida, but they do most of their work in Minnesota, but they, are able to sell when they've got friends that want to buy or sell in a coastal state. I think that may come into more where some of those customs were already not known, and now this is a whole other ball game for them. But I don't know what you see in that kind of vacation second home environment, Amy.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. I also think this has really allowed an opportunity for the agents to educate the consumer as to what they do, where their value is, where there definitely was an assumed commission split, how things were going to happen as a norm, but always it was negotiable. And to me, then our settlement missed that, where it's always been negotiable, and there has been. We've seen from a higher to a lower, but definitely a standard. And I think this has given the agents really an opportunity to talk to the consumers, to show what they bring to the table and why their services are needed. Because I do think it is something that if you have an agent that really cares and is up to date with the standards and the guidelines and the contract agreements and the terms, that representation is worth more than is being paid for, because they're really watching out for somebody that buys a home every 7 years and you have no idea what to watch for, what to look for, those kind of things. So what we've seen from a lot of our brokerages initially was a lot of education to their agents to get ahead of it. Don't go in and just let the consumer ask about it. Talk about it before they even ask about it. Hit the nail on the head with why this is what we do, this is what we charge for it. Just like when you're going to any other service that you're doing. And for us, it's kind of hands out a little bit. We hear things from time to time, but buyers also have an option to negotiate, where they'll pay some of the commission so that the seller will buy down their rate or get really creative. And I think it's allowed those conversations to be opened in negotiations where before they weren't as open. So definitely seeing some positive there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when you mentioned the more boutique, we have seen, and just people I've spoke to nationwide, and then also the person from Housing Wire that we had on, they've seen a lot of the middle style agents, the middleman struggle, because you have especially in large areas. So like, for example, here in Chicago, I've never bought from half these people, but I can tell you who they are. I can tell you their team because they're everywhere, right? And so you have these monster agents, they're huge, and they've got a team, and that they're kind of, pushing out the mom and pop, if you will, or the middleman, because they're saying, well, we'll just reduce our commission and we'll represent both sides, and we'll guarantee that you, buyer, you don't have to pay no matter what, because you're buying from me and the seller's agreed to pay the commission. Whereas if they're saying, if you go with this agent, you got to sign a buyer's agent agreement with them. And if they don't negotiate the right commission to get paid on their behalf at closing, you have to pay it. And it's pretty shady, in my opinion, how they're doing it and wording it, but it's definitely happening. I've seen it throughout, not just around here. And we have, like Wayne said, like most larger areas, we have a lot of like part-time agents that just maybe on the weekend or friends, and they're just kind of non-existent now. Like they can't do it. And then the other thing that we're seeing, and then we talked about with the Housing Wire, this is all she has been working on, is an uptick in buyers using the online platforms, because it's a guaranteed discounted rate. The guaranteed they don't have to pay anything. And in this, as we all know, and this is not a dig at buyers, but if it's the first time you're buying a home, you're not necessarily the most educated person on it. And even if it's the second time you're buying a home, I mean, something you do once, twice, 3 or 4 times in your lifetime, really, you don't know much about it. So they really don't, Amy, your point, understand the value of having their own representation. And I think we're going to see more of that, especially with these online companies. I think we're going to see a fallout from that. Not right away, but I do think down the road, we're going to start hearing about how buyers felt like they weren't, didn't have a seat at the table, or they were misled, or they weren't represented because of this. I mean, being a dual agent, most agents don't even want to be a dual agent in the past, but now they're willing to do it to avoid this whole thing. So Wayne, I think you're right as far as if you don't really see or hear much in your area at Q1, it's probably not maybe super impactful, but I do think even in those areas, by the end of 2025, we might start hearing about like some buyers that felt that they were done wrong. They didn't know what a dual agent was. They didn't know that they should have done it, And so I think education, like you were talking about, Amy, is going to be a very big piece of it, and something that our industry, even though we're the title side of it, is going to have to help with. And also, I mean, Wayne, you can chime in. It's a great marketing tool, right? Providing the education to your realtor partners, right?
Yeah, we spoke at the Florida Land Title Convention on this, and the National Association of Realtors, whatever you think about the settlement and everything else, they have put out a number of really good resources about this, tips and guidelines for realtors, do's and don'ts, all that kind of stuff. And it can be super helpful, and it's not getting, just like everything. I mean, we all have 7-second attention spans, so it's hard to get that stuff in front of people. And if you can do it in a different or engaging way, then feel free, whether that's videos or classes or emails and blogs, whatever you're doing. There's a lot that can be done there, and that's a great way if you're dabbling in tools like ChatGPT and otherwise. You can ask it for some help if there's something that you need to digest. Some of those documents are really long. Like my example at Florida was one of the do's and don'ts documents is like 6 pages long, and I was like, they're not going to take the time. They want to buy and sell houses. They want to help people buy and sell houses, so they're not looking at that. But that's something that you could put into ChatGPT and say, hey, how can I distill this into 2 or 3 bullet points that I can send to my agents, and then poof, you can send that to your sales team or something as real concrete talking points, rather than can we grab coffee before the end of the year.
Yeah, and you're not just providing that to realtors to be able to provide that to their customers, which will hopefully be becoming our customers, is one thing, but also, some of these agents don't fully understand it. And what's expected of them, and some of these local, remove NAR, and you've got your Cook County Association of Realtors and Illinois Association of Realtors. Like, there's so many different things coming at them, and this form's on the way, or this is required. Everybody's kind of going through, just like any type of settlement or change that's come from anywhere regulatory wise. It's hard for them to, especially if they're not a full-time agent, it's really hard for them to stay on track and understand it. So it's a great opportunity. And it sounds like, Amy, you mentioned that, like getting in front of them and just explaining it to them and teaching them it. That's really the best way to go. And I think it lends itself to a lot less confusion as well. So time will tell on that one. So we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the CFPB. And I am so curious to hear your take on this, because I, of course, always have an opinion, as Wayne knows. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on the title waiver pilot program and program in general. I mean, I think I know your thoughts on it, but the thoughts of it actually occurring, the pilot program, in regards to the fact that we will have a different administration come at the end of January. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's going to stay in place? Do you think it's going to move forward? Do you think it's going to get squashed? And just overall, we all know it's not good for the industry. I don't think we need to talk about that. Otherwise, we all wouldn't have jobs. We need title insurance. So, Amy, what are your thoughts?
So in a nutshell, I think it's going to fizzle out. I think I saw an article last month that was, wanting to kind of halt it, and so I'm like, yes, halt it, throw it away, dispose of it, shred it, whatever you want to do to it. But I do think that there'll still be some movement on it. I think there'll be some trials on it. But if they're true trials and they're really looking at the consumer being protected and saving money for the consumer and the risk to the lender and to the consumer, I am sure that this program will go away based on the administration and how they feel about certain of these things. I am led to believe that this will go away. I think it will take a little bit of time, and I think it'll just slowly fizzle out and we just won't hear about it any longer is my hope and what I believe will happen.
Wayne?
Yeah, this is one of the things that I enjoyed getting to talk to Diane Tom about it all to one, because for those of you that don't know, before I got my career in title, I worked on Capitol Hill for 6 or 7 years, and I a lot of people don't realize that when there's not only a shift in presidency, but especially in party, that the transition in DC is just massive. And as the general public, I don't think we realize sometimes like how massive that is. And you're talking like the influx and departure of tens of thousands of people. Like, it's not hundreds. It is the whole administration teams, folks in the military, folks in all of these governmental departments. I mean, it is a massive migration of humans. And so at a minimum, I think that this isn't on anybody's radar for many more months until that gets resettled. It's not like somebody starting on day one is likely going to be out there talking about this. So I think that it's something that if it doesn't, fizzle out, like Amy said, if there are trials or more talk, it's likely more middle of the year, because there's just so much transition at the beginning of any administration. And I think that gets lost sometimes, especially we've all been like cats on a ceiling is how I've been calling it for like a year now plus in dealing with this issue on the advocacy front and everything. But I think that I wouldn't say everybody has to completely let their guard down, but I think that there will be some breathing room, at least at the beginning of the year, compared to the speed with which it seems like some of this has been dealt with so far.
I think you're both dead on. I think that if it moves at all, to move forward with any traction, it will be like Amy, you're saying, few things might, as far as the pilot program go, but move very slowly, maybe a trial here or a pilot here. But I do think it'll fizzle out. And to Wayne's point, I don't think it'll be first quarter. I think there's a million other things that they've got to get set in place, and a little bit more of a pertinent things maybe that they're going to focus on. I do think once, we all know there's going to be a new director at the CFPB. And I think once that is solidified, which can take some time, obviously, but I think when that is solidified, it might move things a lot quicker. And to Wayne's point again, never let your guard down. These are just our predictions, but I do think it's something that's probably going to fizzle out. I don't really think it even had the traction it had hoped to have in the current administration. So I think, switching the administrations is going to be it's going to kill it off. And I think it's very interesting with the CFPB. I think obviously they'll change the director, and I don't see them honestly doing anything to work hand in hand with the CFPB over the 4 years. We've been through this with it before. I think it's worse now. So I think we can expect to see kind of a more hands down, hands off approach from the CFPB in general, just by nature, but not right away, like Wayne said. And, they've been known to kind of sneak in as much as they can when they know there's change coming. So that's also something to kind of keep an eye on for some of our partners and the big banks and all that type of stuff that they're working on. I know everybody knows that junk fees are their current target. I think that they will continue with that, but I don't think it'll get the trajectory it wants, because by the time it would be something that they'd be trying to put in place, you'd probably have that switch of director. So, I literally, since November 6th, I've probably got asked no less than 100 times if I think the CFPB is going to go away. I can never answer this question. I get it all the time. you know, even when it doesn't go away, it settles down, if you will. So, you know, I always remind people it was put there to protect consumers, not, you know, make our lives a living hell. I said, so it just depends on who's running it and what your viewpoint is. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think they'll be, you know, strengthening it anytime in this administration. But I don't necessarily think they're going to just shut it down. I also don't think when you're talking about the change in how money, employees and people, the transition is, people don't necessarily understand how large the CFPB is either, and how many things that they actually oversee or have an umbrella over. So you might see some more limitations or restrictions, but I mean, to shut it down would be in an astronomical event, which, yeah, could happen over 10 years maybe, but it's definitely, I think they would just put more restrictions and guidelines in place. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. And so now that I just said that, interestingly, you know, but both of you, what are some of the questions that you guys have gotten, and at the end of this year, about next year, have you guys gotten any kind of random questions from people as to, like, you know, whether it's the change in administration or, you know, the interest rates or the markets? Have you guys gotten any, you know, worthwhile questions or kind of crazy questions about it?
Yeah, I've definitely had some questions as far as 2025. I mean, 2024, you know, the ebbs and flows of it. And, you know, we used to be able to gauge our business by seasonality, and we knew certain months would be slower and then certain months would be busier and then certain months would be mediocre. But since COVID, those weighing tools have totally changed, and the consistency or inconsistency has been more consistent, you know, and just not knowing. So just what will 2025 look like, and what do you envision, and what do you forecast? And really for us, I mean, we're kind of the economists we've heard from, those that we've spoke to, we're looking at 2025 to be a better year than 2024, but not a stellar year. And so, you know, I think there'll be a lot of change. Interest rates, you know, are expected to stay in the 6s, which, if we've gotten over the 2s, isn't as horrible. But if we're still in the 2 and 3 mindset, it's horrible. You know, so I think that mindset is still changing. Sales prices still for sellers, you know, as you stated earlier, Leslie, they're still looking for that higher sales price that if they'd have sold in 2021, they'd have got it in a matter of minutes. You know, listings staying on the market, you know, back in COVID was 2 days max, and now is at least 60 days in most areas in Florida. Just a totally different market. But I think adjusting to those markets, being prepared for those markets, diversifying our businesses to not rely just on one market, but really to diversify into other markets, you know, as the ebbs and flows of those businesses come in. And so those are kind of the questions: is what do you predict in 2025, and how do we prepare for it?
So Wayne, what are you getting as far as, I'm sure people are asking you the best way for them to prepare for 2025, right? From a marketing, I see you going, oh Lord. You know, what are you seeing like the most common asked questions as far as, or what, maybe don't say common asked questions. What advice are you giving as to how agents can best prepare? I think, Amy, you just gave some to, you know, diversify. Don't be, you know, for those people that were solely saying, oh, we're refi only. It's a great business. And they found out, sadly, their hard way, that the past 2 years were not refi friendly, right? So, you know, other than diversifying and spreading yourself out and expecting, you know, different things, what kind of advice are you giving, Wayne, as far as how your partners can best prepare for 2025?
I think, and I would love Amy's thought on this, but I think, like, the phrase that I would use for most people is keep your head on a swivel, because things change fast and faster than ever before. And I think that's only going to continue. I think, like, over a decade ago when I started in the industry, I feel like there was a lot of, like, it takes a long time for stuff to affect us. We work in a quiet part of the business. We're not seen as much. We're not, you know, like, or even in my specific world of marketing, like, we don't have to market because we've had our customers for 50 years and all that. And, like, now you can have a competitor across the street, and, like, you go on vacation for a week and come back and somebody's opened a title shop. Like, there's just so much of that kind of change that I think that you just have to be more, if your business in general, not just the marketing side of things, but if you're not set up for adaptability, then you've got a problem. Whether that's an increase in business, a decrease in business, regulatory change, just all kinds of stuff. I think if you're not thinking about how to be, or even natural disasters, like just business operations, your own succession planning, because you don't know what's in front of us, and that part of life is only getting crazier too. So I think that that adaptability piece is something that a lot of owners on, for on the better side of things, didn't really have to worry about for a long time, or only the ones that were out there doing massive growth. They weren't, if you were happy with your one county operation or your full state operation, but there are so many agents now that are trying to diversify and trying to grow into different states. Like Amy's state is extremely popular for this industry to grow into as well, not just for home buyers, but all of that kind of stuff. If you weren't doing that, you thought you were kind of safe. And I don't think that people are not safe necessarily, but I don't think the water is as still as it used to be. And I don't think we'll ever put that toothpaste back in the tube, to use that expression at this point. I don't know, Amy, if you think that change, I mean, that's probably the biggest change to me in the last decade, aside from technology and that kind of thing, like just as far as how the business operates, that expectation.
Can I say amen? Can we go to church for a minute? Because all of those things are so accurate. And you're so right, Wayne. We used to have a lot of time to change, and you would see it coming, and you'd have time to get your team used to it. And one thing we don't allow said in our company when we talk about why we do something is because we've always done it that way. No. Challenge the status quo. And that is so important now more than ever, not only for consumer demand and expectation, but also for fraud. Before we would catch a fraud email because they misspelled and they didn't speak our language, but with ChatGPT, which is a great thing for our business, but a horrible thing for the fraudsters, they can speak just like we do. And so, yes, change, I think, is the only thing we should have consistent in our business as it's needed and what needs to be changed. Listening to the clients, the different generations, and something we train too is we don't process files, we don't close files as we want to close them as a specific closer, but as to the client needs within parameters, of course. Because this client may only want to text and they never want to talk, where this client still wants to talk on the phone and email, and just having those things in place to accommodate the client, but always looking to change that, because tomorrow that process won't work. That's going to change because of a client demand or because fraud, and we need to take precautions on that. But I totally agree. Head on a swivel is a good plan, and just always being aware and alert.
Yeah, and I also think, adding to what you both said, that we've never been in such a regulatory environment in our industry since 2010. And prior to that, for 20, 30 plus years, I mean, we had a HUD that the rules never changed, and we had RESPA that the rules never changed. And same with the realtors, really, right? So our industry, while it always had some sort of oversight, if you will, was never directly impacted by so much regulatory changes that other consumer-based and finance industries were. And I think that caused a lot of havoc early on, and people are kind of used to it now, which the ones that aren't, are the same people like you two are saying, that aren't super adaptable to change. They're going to struggle more, right? Because we've had a lot thrown at us between COVID, between the TILA with CFPB and all the regulatory changes that we see constantly now. It's a different outlook. And I also think, and Wayne, you were a big part of this, but I think that in the past, I don't know, maybe I forget, it's going to be 2025. In the past 7 to 8 years, I think the mindset has shifted for us, for our industry, to not just sit back and hope that somebody sends us an order, and that we're actually directly marketing and directly to consumers as well as our partners, and educating them. So we're a bigger part of the process now, where before everyone just kind of showed up and really didn't know what we did. I mean, granted, there's still people that don't know what title insurance is, but I think that mindset has also changed and allowed people to grow. And I think it's what kept us in business and our industry strong 2020 on. And Wayne, I'll quote us, is when you look at 2024 and 2025, don't compare it to 2020, 21, and 22. those were anomalies. That was a unicorn and rainbow years of our industry. You have to look at 2019, right? And have an apples to apples. And Wayne, I feel like you were going to try and say something, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that I still get to work with the American Land Title Association is their homeowner outreach program, which offers lots of helpful marketing tools for the consumer, whether they're a buyer or a seller or a real estate agent or an attorney or whatever it may be. There's lots of tools there. And when we rolled out that program in 2014, almost a decade ago now, there were so many people that were like, well, we're not really talking to the end consumer. And I will say, one of the things in the last quarter that has shocked me, and some of you will roll your eyes at this, but I would say at least a dozen companies that are either starting from scratch or are making a giant pivot in trying to go direct to consumer in our business. And it's something, again, that 10 years ago, that's not necessarily what people would have said. A lot of people would poo-poo that. And like I said, some of you may be rolling your eyes right now, but I think there is a world in that. And like Amy was saying earlier, even with what's happening with the NAR settlement, there's more of an opening there. Like that door in the last, not even the last decade, the last 5 years has been cracked open more and more and more, just in terms of transparency for us. And part of that is because of the fraud issues and things. Like we need to have that open and everything else. But I think that there's a real opportunity there. And if I had to make a major prediction for like the next 5 years, I would say that's a big one of like whoever starts to crack that code first is going to be a winner in their markets.
Yeah, and in addition to that is, access to everything is at our fingertips, right? In 2010, everyone didn't have their phone with all the apps. There were not apps for everything. People didn't have social media, or they were just starting to, but it wasn't like businesses. It was just family and friends. But now I can go online and find out, hey, who's the #1 closer? Who's this? So, I think it's underrated, not marketing directly out to the consumer or being in the face of your partners and just sitting back and hope they choose you because you turned around their title in 24 hours. Like that's just, those days are gone, right? Education. And I also think we have a more savvy, no offense, I'm not young, but like I think younger buyers are just more educated and more savvy because of what they've lived through and what they've seen and because of the internet. So I think all those combined, when your prediction is probably dead on. And Amy, would you agree with that?
I would, and I think it's definitely due to the internet. When I needed something, when I first bought a home, I went to my parents or I went to a resource. I didn't have a phone that I could pull up stats and do that. So the accessibility so quickly that they have, and the consumers now, the younger buyers, they take pride in that. They are going to do their research. They're going to make sure what they're being told is accurate and factual and stats back it up. So yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah, and I'll end with agreeing with something that you said too. Well, we have people who only want to text. Like you're looking at 2 of them. Like I don't need to call you. I don't need to talk to you. Like if you call me, I'm just like, ugh, what's wrong? Like, why are you calling me? You could have said this to me. I could have filled it out online. Like, and we're not, I'm not a millennial, so you can only imagine what they're thinking and feeling. So, we just have, I think 2025, we need to embrace it. We need to be grateful that interest rates are not expected to go up. They're expected to come down and stabilize. 2025 should bring a stronger real estate market as far as inventory in some areas. Still nothing crazy, but definitely, not sparse pickings, which makes it easier for buyers. And I think we can expect to see that migration to the areas we talked about, which is great on them. But I do think also that doesn't necessarily mean other markets aren't going to be strong, just means those are going to have higher numbers. And I think if remote work continues, which is a whole nother topic we could talk about with so many companies trying to enforce people to come back, as long as that continues, you're going to have a more diverse group of areas that people are buying. And I think that's great for our markets, and it keeps the prices where they should be versus everybody trying to go to one area and bubbling up. So I think 2025 looks positive. I don't think, like you said, Amy, it's going to be anything, that we're going to look back on 5 years. That was a great year, but I don't think it's going to be a bad year. And hopefully, the areas that maybe didn't have the best 2024 will have a better 2025. And hopefully some of the stuff we talked about and advice you guys gave will, lead them to head out that way. But I want to thank you guys. I know we're out of time. Sorry. So I don't want to take up much of your time, but I want to thank both of you for coming on. And I wanted to wish you both happy holidays. And I hope everybody on the call has a great holiday. And if anybody has any questions or anything, please reach out. We're happy to answer them. And with that, we will give you your day back. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.